that they were making separate treaties with at separate times, with all of them. And in terms of the largest of these republics, the 1911 Republic of Sun Yat-sen. Sun Yat-sen was a man who was raised in China, but he was educated in Japan. And when Yuan Shikai took over the republic and declared himself the first Han-Chinese emperor in 300 years, that republic became the Imperial Republic. Now, this was the largest republic in China, because the Communist Chinese forces were an insurgency, and the Nationalist Chinese forces were a foreign-operated force that was receiving financial assistance, weaponization from the outside. But the largest republic, the 1911 Republic, which both the Chinese who are communists and the Chinese who are nationalists lay claim to, you will see both in nationalist China and in communist China pictures of Sun Yat-sen. That National Republic of 1911, that Imperial Republic under Yuan Shikai, declared war on the United States in 1941, as Japan declared war, as Vietnam declared war, as Manchuria declared war, as Thailand declared war on the United States on December 7th of 1941. So the reason that China had to do this was because when America froze all of the assets of Japan, they also froze all of the assets of China, whereas Japan still had a yen block. And I discussed this, however, briefly on December 7th, in terms of December 7th of last year on Coast to Coast AM in my interview with George Norrie, when I discussed this financial freeze on Japanese assets. I bring this up as quickly as I can, and the point of fact is that what they did to the Japanese, as bankrupting as it was for the nation of Japan, Japan still had a yen block. They still had Thailand. They still had Indochina. They still had Manchuria. They still had Korea. They still had all of the Taiwanese and various other overseas possessions in the Pacific in which to deal with in terms of a contained autarkic economy. The Chinese, however, were in a state of civil war and poverty, so when their assets were frozen by the United States condemned immediately and literally millions and millions of Chinese to starvation, famine, hunger, and death, because nothing was coming in from the outside. Nothing, except from Japan. So at that moment, the largest republic of the three republics in China, the claimants, such as communism and nationalism, were still on the periphery, but the largest core republic of China declared war on the United States, something which is certainly hidden by the current communist government of communist China, something which is certainly hidden by the nationalist government of Taiwan, simply because it's nothing that needs to be remembered in terms of its relations with the outside world, and something which is certainly hidden by American textbooks, because most people are totally unaware of it. And in terms of Drew Hempel on Nick Redfern saying that this really covers all of the details, Nick Redfern is an excellent investigative reporter. He is basically a British investigative reporter. The testament to his professionalism, to his brilliance in investigative reporting, lies in the fact that his conclusions touch so tantalizingly close to the reality of these various situations. But Nick Redfern presents you pieces of the puzzle, and he's desperately trying to put together these fragments into a coherent picture. This cannot be done in his book, Body Snatchers in the Desert. What I am showing you is the entire picture. The truth is here, and again, the problem is accepting it or digesting it. This is something that Nick Redfern is trying to do as well as he can as an outsider. I'm speaking to you as someone who was an insider, no matter how reluctantly in certain cases, but someone who was trying to establish a career in the Department of Defense as a librarian. And in terms of rejection of Asians, or rather Mr. Reject, as he signs himself on the website, speaking of Asians and the inability of people to mistake Asians for aliens, this is something that really needs to be gone into in terms of America's ability to discern races. This comes from the book A Strange and Secret Peoples by Carol Silver, and this is an excellent book that I would recommend that anyone do some reading on. This is Ota Benga. Ota Benga was an African pygmy who was brought to the United States at the time of my grandfather, who was Caucasian, by the way, my father's father. And Otabenga was brought and stuck in the zoo. He was presented to the United States population in the monkey house. And this was shortly before World War II. He was stuck in the monkey house with a orangutan whom they attempted to have him breed with. And they were so ignorant, so racist, that they didn't even give him an African primate to breed with. He was given an Asian primate, an orangutan, to breed with. And he was basically, this photograph, by the way, is by Jesse Tarbox Beals from the St. Louis Exposition, 1904, courtesy of the Library Services of the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And to show you how generous they were with this poor guy, they actually threw bones around in his cage to intimate that he was a cannibal. So that is the level of ignorance, of fear, of hatred that existed in America at a time when these people in this modern environment are expecting us to accept the fact that people understand what they can about Asians. To give you an example of the ignorance of Asian culture, and this is something I have to concentrate on simply because of the fact that it is so prevalent. My personal experience, of course, is I have to deal constantly with the cultural assumptions that are made about Asians that at this point in history, thankfully, are not tolerated by other minorities. The African American experience has been coeval with the development of America due to their experience of slavery. They have served as the shock troopers in terms of the American civil rights movement. But at this point in history, thankfully, they are not subject to stupid assumptions, ignorant assumptions, at the highest levels of education that the Asians experience today. Now, one of these assumptions, for instance, when Ian Punnett on Coast to Coast AM was interviewing a lady who happened to be an autodidact on anthropophagy, or anthropophagy, which is the cannibalism of other human beings by humans, she brought up a myth to which I have been exposed to all of my life. She thinks, and expressed this on the air with no protest from Ian Punnett, that Chinese eat aborted fetuses as an aphrodisiac. Now, I have had MDs listening to such shows approach me and ask me how these fetuses taste. So it's assumed that because I have epicanthic folds to my eyes that I eat babies before I have sex. So it's impossible for me to even comprehend how Americans cannot understand the racist dehumanization of another culture in the modern age. Certainly, even my experience at Sonoma State University, home of Philip Plait, the bad astronomer, the year that I was subjected to go there in order to investigate Project Censored, per behest of the Department of Defense, in order to try and raise my security clearance levels, the year that I was there, I was going through the dorms, and all these people would shout out the window, "Go back to Korea." I'm not Korean, by the way. But in terms of even my friends there, who happen to be Latin American, in this case Mexican, they would have posters from some Hustler magazine or some porno magazine, and the centerfold would show some Chinese girl who obviously had been digitally enhanced so that her genitalia were pointed horizontally instead of vertically. And they were convinced that this was anatomically accurate for Chinese females. So these were people who even meant no offense whatsoever. But this is the level of ignorance. Ignorance is not stupidity. Ignorance is ignorance. But let's make sure that those days of ignorance are at an end. Bill McDonald, who actually, as a forensic illustrator, did the illustrations of the Roswell bodies, actually believes that these are aliens. But as you can see, by the illustrations which he drew in copyright,